Welcome to John Martin Talks, where we battle ignorance and apathy daily. The growing ignorance of just how special this experiment we call the United States of America is, and the apathy that we can't or won't do anything and everything to save her. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we got a great show for you this morning. We're going to start out with a story about the Senate hearings on the coronavirus. Dr. Fauci and friends appeared before a Senate panel yesterday, all of them remote, by the way, proper social distancing, and they were talking about all things corona, where we've come from, where we are, and where we're going. And according to this article, it painted a bleak future for our dealings with coronavirus. I'm not so sure I agree with that, but we'll get into that in just a moment. Then secondly, we're going to do a story about old Joe Biden, man. He is like locked away, secluded, isolated, however you want to put it, in his basement, and he appears to be going to stay there, his basement at his Delaware home. And he's pretty much said he's going to stay there for the foreseeable future. So the question is, can Biden literally win the presidency from his basement? And we'll get into that. And great news out there, although you won't hear a whole lot about it, and we'll talk about why that is. But the Republicans have won special elections or are winning special elections in both Wisconsin and California that happened yesterday, and we'll bring you up to speed on that. But we start with the Senate hearings. New York Times article here. At Senate hearing, government experts paint a bleak picture of the pandemic. Two of the federal government's top healthcare officials painted a grim picture of the months ahead on Tuesday, warning a Senate panel that the coronavirus pandemic was far from contained. Whoever said it was contained? We'll get into that in a second. Just a day after President Trump declared, "We have met the moment and we have prevailed." So they're basically saying that President Trump has announced that we've contained the virus, we've beat the thing. He really hasn't said that. He's given positive messages of hope, and for that, he should be sorely condemned, I suppose. But I watched this thing yesterday, off and on. I had it playing in the background, and I kept tuning in and out of it. And I got to tell you, really, it was mostly a waste of time. I mean, if you watched it, I'd love to hear your comments. Go to whatever Facebook page you're watching on now, chime in. As always, I'll get back to you as soon as possible. We're getting hundreds of comments, by the way, and I greatly appreciated that. I had a couple yesterday that really brought cheers to my heart and maybe tears to my eyes when people said that I was the best show on the internet. Man, that's pretty cool. I don't know if that's true or not, but if you believe that, then I am very heartened by that. And people have been saying repeatedly that they are now getting their news directly from John Martin Talks and Billy Bob here. And I can tell you we're both thrilled about that. So keep chiming in. Keep sharing the show. That's one thing we absolutely need you to do, by the way. Share the show as much as possible. That would go a long way to helping us not only get the word out, but interest and everything else. But I watch, and one of the things, if you're new to the show, first of all, where you been? Secondly, welcome. Glad to have you here. But one of the things I do as a public service, I watch shows, read articles, programs, that kind of thing, so you don't have to. And I did that yesterday watching these Senate hearings. And like I say, essentially nothing really new came out of that. If you've been following the coronavirus, COVID-19, our response to it, I don't think anything that was said yesterday changes your mind. If you're for getting on with life and trying to face this thing head on and get the economy going, then you heard some things you needed to hear to feel that way. If you want to hunker down in your basement like Joe Biden, and we'll talk about him in just a few minutes, if you want to live in fear, you found plenty of reasons to live in fear. There was literally something for everybody in that. I guess that's government at its finest, right? Something for everybody. The officials, Dr. Anthony S. Fauci, Dr. Fauci, the nation's top infectious disease expert, and Dr. Robert Redfield, the director of Centers for Disease Control, CDC, predicted dire consequences if the nation reopened its economy too soon. I'm not sure I agree that they did that. Now, you could interpret it that way, certainly, and the Democrats were ready to, they were there for gloom. They were chomping at the bit, the Democrats, for gloom and doom, I can tell you that. But the economy too soon, noting the United States still lacked critical testing capacity and the ability to trace contacts of those infected. And this keeps coming up time and time again. Testing. Testing 1, 2, 3, or 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 million. And I don't have a problem with testing. I'm all for testing. But the way the media is portraying it, and especially the progressive left politicians, it's like testing is the beginning and end all of everything. That until we can literally test everybody in America on a daily basis, which is not going to happen, by the way, we're never going to be able to move forward and get this passed. Essentially, the message about testing is what I have a problem with. It's essentially a lie. Now, I'm not saying the tests are a lie. That's not what I'm saying. But the promise of the test is disingenuous at best. Let's put it that way. I'll try to be polite this morning. Because just from a pure logical standpoint, let's assume, and this is not going to happen, but just assume that we could literally test everybody in America today. Tomorrow, half those people could be infected with, they could all test negative, and tomorrow they could all be infected. That's the nature of this virus. It's very infectious. That's one thing we seem to be learning. And but the death toll is manageable. And I'm like the president. One death is far too many. But the reality is that we haven't found a cure for life and death. If you get life, you're going to get death. It's just a fact of it. But Dr. Fauci said, if we do not respond in an adequate way when the fall comes, in other words, if we don't do this reopening or however you want to label it in a proper way, when the fall comes, given that it is without a doubt that there will be infections that will be in the community, then we run the risk of having a resurgence. Now, that's been interpreted as gloom and doom, bleak picture. I don't really see it that way. The man is just giving his opinion. Now, of course, they wanted to turn Fauci, they being the Democrats, against President Trump. He wasn't having any of that. In fact, he clarified that there is no conflict between him and the president. In fact, he testified that the president listens to him, listens to other experts, and makes the decision that he thinks is best. That's essentially what Fauci said. And that is exactly, by the way, what a true leader should always do. They shouldn't just, let me just give you an example. My dad, who was a very prominent political figure here in the state of Florida, his name was Sid Martin. They called him Big Sid. He told me a long time ago, never be afraid to surround yourself with people who are smarter than you. In other words, a wise man will do that. He said, listen to all of them, then formulate your best policy based on everything you've heard and do what you think is right. I think that pretty much sums up what President Trump is doing. He surrounded himself. Look at that task force, man. And Fauci, love him, hate him, whatever. And I know there's all kind of conspiracy theories. And I'm not saying I'm a big fan of Fauci, but he's obviously a very bright guy. And Donald Trump is listening to him. Is he letting Fauci dictate everything? I don't think so. Is President Trump moving fast enough? That's certainly debatable. Is he too cautious? You know, all these things are debatable. But I think Fauci's testimony, and the Democrats kept trying to get him to say something negative about the president, which he essentially did not do. This part here, it's because they talk about a resurgence, a likely resurgence in the fall. You know, if we don't do it, it could be catastrophic. One thing, if you've watched this show any length of time, you know, one of the things I like to do is I like to be helpful. So I'm going to try to be helpful right now. Let me just state matter of fact. There are going to be more infections. We're going to be dealing with this virus likely for at least decades, let alone maybe forever. It's just the way it is. Now, we're going to have to at some point, and many of you are already doing this, but we're going to have to assess our own risk. We can't simply wait for the government to dictate to us when is it safe to go out of the cave. because it's never been safe to go out of the cave. And I don't know that it ever will be. You know, there's this assumption of safety that we have in modern society, which I think is fictitious. Now, we do have less threats to us on a daily basis than, say, the cavemen did, or we're probably safer and more healthy in many ways than any time in the history of the world. We're living better, that's for sure, even during this times of shutdown. But this idea that there's this cocoon of safety around us at all times is, I think, has been a fantasy from day one. It has never been safe to leave the cave, and it's still not. I hate to tell you, Corona aside. So you got to assess your own risk. Now, what about being paid? Now, this didn't really come up too much during the hearing. There was some references to it. What about this idea of being paid to stay at home? I want to expand on that a minute. I started to do a complete story on it, but I want to just read you an excerpt. You know, Kamala Harris is considered one of the leading candidates to be the next vice president and maybe president. You know how that goes. But Kamala Harris recently tweeted this: bills come in every single, talking about bill, not bills from the legislature, but your like electric bills, come in every single month during the pandemic, and so should help from the government. So the government should be paying your bills, according to Kamala Harris. Harris has endorsed a plan called the Monthly Economic Crisis Support. Now, this hasn't seen the light of day too much. The House, I believe, passed it just the other day, but it hasn't come up before the Senate. The Monthly Economic Crisis Support Act, which would send $2,000 per month to Americans, period, who make less than $120,000 per year. Married couples would receive $4,000 per month, and as well as $2,000 for each child. So a married couple with 2 children get $6,000 a month paid, right? As well as $2,000 for each child, and the checks would be sent for up to 3 months after the corona crisis ends. Now, what would be the definition of the corona crisis ends? Because based on what the Democrats are telling us, that could be minimum 2 years, possibly quite forever. So government, the Democrats, the progressive government that we have, they are trying their best to make you, the American people, as dependent upon them as possible. And I'm telling you now, if we go to this, because government programs, once they start, they rarely ever end. It's like pulling teeth to get a program. And we got programs that are still in existence that have no meaning whatsoever, going back to the beginning of the country, literally. I mean, it's that crazy. But once these programs start, they're very difficult to stop. And so the Democrats are pushing this forward. Yeah, they want to help you, right? What they really want is for you to be dependent upon government, and that is somewhere they can derive their power from you. Remember what Alex de Tocqueville said. If you don't know who he is, you ought to check him out. He's a French philosopher, so to speak, that was here roughly in like the 1830s in the United States. And he wrote a book about what he saw here, experiences. He's one of the geniuses of his time, no doubt. And he said famously, basically, that our government, the United States government, which he was in awe of, would last up until the point that people realized they could vote money for themselves. Once they realized, and politicians realized, that they could take other people's money and give it to you by the vote, that America, the republic that we had, would be on its way out. And I think his words are as true now as they ever were. Back to this story. Dr. Fauci told senators that the coronavirus therapeutics and vaccine would almost certainly not be ready in time for the new school year. I don't know if you heard this news, but it just kind of broke overnight. California, their state university system, which I believe is the biggest in the country, has now come out and officially said that there will be no fall semester on campus, that they are going to internet remote learning, however you want to label it, come the fall. That, ladies and gentlemen, is huge, and I expect many other university systems, and maybe all, to follow suit. Which, if you're wondering, on a side note, about like college football, that is probably not going to happen in the fall. And I'll just say it very quickly. I don't see a scenario, really, where you play college football. Keep in mind, it's not like the pros. You have multiple student athletes, all kind of sports. I don't see how you say it's safe to play college football, fans or no fans, when it's not safe to be on the campus itself. I don't see how that works. So I hope I'm wrong, but I don't see it that way. And I can tell you that if the University of Florida, I mentioned this the other day, if they don't reopen up in my area with 60,000 strong in the city of Gainesville, this college community will be a ghost town, man. It will be a total disaster. Whether you agree with the decision or not, I think it's pretty, I don't see how you could argue for a college town. It will be a total disaster. Dr. Fauci told about the school year, the outbreaks in other parts of the world would surely reach the United States. That humility in the face of unpredictable killer, this is Fauci, meant erring on the side of caution. Now, exactly what does that mean? Even with children who have fared well but have recently shown new vulnerabilities, the reality is there's only been a handful of kids that died anywhere in the world. It's not like that's a thing. But as I say, what he's essentially saying here is never leave the cave. Don't leave the cave. You got to stay locked up forever. And the whole thing about the vaccine, and I keep telling you this, you can watch my podcast, by the way, by going directly to John Martin Talks Facebook page, like it and share it with others. You can see all of our shows, both live and archived on YouTube. Spell out John Martin Talks all together, and it will pop up. We'd appreciate more subscribers. We're getting more every day, more views on YouTube. You can watch us on all the Facebook networks you're currently watching on now. You can also see us on America's Voice News. They got free apps on the Android, the iPhone. They stream across Roku, Fire Stick, Apple, Dish Network, Channel 219, and Pluto Network. And you can also see archives of our show on their site as well. So there's multiple ways to watch us, and we're growing every day. But what I've been telling you about the vaccine, and I'm not opposed to trying to find a vaccine. In fact, I wish they had one yesterday, right? Because I'm ready to get this thing over, and I'm not downplaying the fear of getting infected. I'm just telling you the realities of what we need to expect and move forward on. The vaccine is unlikely in any time frame less than 2 years. And I would argue, and I hope I'm wrong, that it's unlikely, period. There aren't any vaccines essentially for respiratory illnesses. Even the quote flu shot is just giving you a best shot. It doesn't prevent you from getting the flu. People get the flu all the time after they have a flu shot. Is it helpful? No doubt. Is it the panacea? No. Matter of fact, it's the best guess. Apparently, and this is not making a whole lot of news because everything is corona, COVID-19, but apparently their best guess this year on the flu shot was not a very good one at all. And we had a very bad flu season, which is the only cure for the flu was corona, right? It seems to have cured cancer and everything else. But we can't sit back and wait for a vaccine. I just don't think that makes any sense at all. Dr. Redfield pleaded with the senators, he's the CDC fellow, to build up the nation's public health infrastructure. He said, we are not out of the woods yet, but we are more prepared. Wow. That sounds like a truly dire prediction, right? I mean, the headline of this particular story is just ludicrous to start with. They gave what I think was their best honest assessment of where we, like a roadmap, where we were, where we are, and where they think we're heading, and some possible cautions. They were cautious, but they weren't dire about it. And to me, it says, we're not out of the woods yet, but are we more prepared? That could be, he said, we are more prepared. That sounds like good news to me, not dire prediction. The two were among 4 government doctors. The others were Dr. Stephen Hahn, the Commissioner of Food and Drug, the FDA guy, Admiral Brett Gorora, an Assistant Secretary for Health who testified remotely during the hearing. The hearing, and I love this title, check this out. The hearing titled COVID-19, Safely Getting Back to Work and Back to School. Doesn't sound like they're going that way. Offered little concrete advice on how that would happen. But there was no particular advice to be given. They're giving you their best guess based on the data they're receiving. That's just all it is. It was the first chance lawmakers, talking about the senators, have had to publicly question the officials in Congress since Mr. Trump declared a national emergency 2 months ago, and to do so without Mr. Trump standing by. So the implication of that statement is that they have to watch over their back because Trump is standing behind them ready to, off with their heads kind of thing, which is not true. It's not the reality. But like I say, I love the title, COVID-19, Safely Getting Back to Work and Back to School. I don't know that there is a safe way to combat this virus in a sense that implying that somehow we're going to wait and be sheltered at home on house arrest. They're actually putting ankle bracelets on people. I talked about that last week. As I say, check out our podcast on all the different ways I listed a few minutes ago. But they're actually literally putting people on house arrest now. They're testing it throughout the country. It is nuts. I never thought we'd be there, but that's where we are. But there's no real safe way to do this. There's just the best practices way. In other words, it is a risk. When you go to sleep, I hate to break this to you snowflakes because maybe you will never go to sleep, and I'm not advocating that. When you go to sleep, there is no guarantee that you will wake up ever again. In fact, the best way to actually go out is in your sleep. So there is no guarantee. What is that? Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. And if I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. Something to that effect, a simple children's prayer. That's about the best prayer you could hope for. Because there's no guarantee. The only guarantee is death and taxes, right? And the Democrats are going to raise them. That's a guarantee as well. But this hearing was all for show. And by saying that, I'm not criticizing the experts that testified. I'm not necessarily criticizing all the senators. But it was for show. It didn't really reveal any new information unless this is the first time you paid attention to coronavirus in any way. Now, the Dems, I'm telling you, the whole thing was an effort to attack Donald Trump, and they're going to keep the economy locked down. They were trying to find excuses to keep the economy locked down because they believe that if you are locked down, terrified in your house, just like Joe Biden, it is the best way and perhaps the only way for them to actually knock out Donald Trump. So expect, as Rush Limbaugh said, the Godfather, thank you, Godfather, for providing all of this opportunity out there for anybody on talk radio or talk Facebook, however you want to. Conservative talk wouldn't exist without Rush. Let me just put it that way. So I'm continuing to pray for his recovery from his lung cancer. But as he said on his show the other day, he said, expect the fight of your lives between now and November because the Democrats are going to pull out every stop. They're going to try to keep the economy shut down. They don't care if the American people suffer. That was ample before. There's ample evidence before the coronavirus even hit. They want you to be terrified, in fear, and they think that, and broke, and they think that is their best shot to get rid of Donald Trump, man. The Republicans, on the other hand, I got to say, most of them were like deer in the headlights, kind of. They couldn't really figure out what questions to ask. They basically repeating talking points and questions that have already been asked. So as I say, it was really somewhat of a waste of time. The virus is here, ladies and gentlemen. It's here, and I know you know this. It's going to be here for a long time. Maybe the rest of our lives we'll be dealing with it. You have to assess your own risk. I keep saying that, but it's very true. And we have to make a decision, ladies and gentlemen. Ultimately, in spite of all this different opinions and all that stuff, it really comes down to this, in my opinionated fact, although I believe it's a fact nonetheless. We got to make a decision. Do we have the courage to be a free people in a free nation? Because trust me, it takes a great deal of courage to get freedom. It's never free. And to hold on to freedom takes sometimes even more courage because we can get fat and happy real quick. So we have to make a decision, assess our own risk, and are we going to be a free republic in this great United States? Are we just going to be Corona land? Is that what it's going to be? Because the Democrats, the progressive leftists, everybody who has Trump derangement syndrome, they really want us to become Corona land because that's the only way that Joe Biden can win. And let's get into that right now. This is from an AP story. To it. I don't actually wish Joe Biden any ill whatsoever. I don't relish criticizing him. Now, policy criticisms are fair game, but I don't like criticizing him for his mental capacity, the fact that I really believe that he is suffering from dementia and that he is literally deteriorating before our eyes and has been for over a year now. I don't enjoy talking about that. I really don't. But it is a fact, and the fact that he is running for president makes it a very important question. Because if he wins, forget all the policies. We're either going to have a mentally impaired president or he's not going to last, and we're going to have somebody we didn't even really vote for. So it has to be talked about. All right, on with this story. This is an AP story. Biden plans to stay at home, testing the limits of a virtual campaign. So basically, can he win by staying in his basement? Joe Biden has no foreseeable plans to resume in-person campaigning, and a pandemic that is testing whether a national presidential election can be won by a candidate communicating almost entirely from his home. So they're saying Joe Biden's campaign is going to be most entirely from his home. Well, in fairness, President Trump so far, for the most part, and now he's supposed to be getting out here soon and starting to travel. He did to Arizona. But really, President Trump has been doing the same thing, right? He's been campaigning virtually from his home. Just happens to be that his home happens to be the White House. It's his house right now. It's our house, and we're renting it to him or whatever. Hopefully for another 4 years. Let's re-sign the lease on it, man. But both of them are campaigning from their house. It's just that, President Trump has a little bit bigger house. The virtual campaign Biden is waging from Wilmington, Delaware. Now, let me back up and say this. If you hadn't heard, essentially, now they have not formally announced this. I want to make that clear. But the Democratic Party seems to be resigned to the fact that they're going to have a virtual convention. The Republicans are still planning. Now, they have a virtual one in the plans as well, but they're still acting as if they're going to have a physical convention where people actually attend. The Democrats, I'm sure, are still hoping for that. They desperately need that, but it seems like they have resigned themselves to the fact that that's not going to happen. So they're openly making preparations for that. The virtual campaign Biden is waging from Wilmington, Delaware, is a stark contrast with President Donald Trump, who is planning travel despite warnings from the public experts about the coronavirus spread. I think he's supposed to be in Pennsylvania later this week or maybe beginning of next week. It also intensifies the spotlight on how Biden, the presumptive Democratic nominee, still presumptive, will manage his campaign with some of his party fretting that his still developing approach isn't reaching enough voters. So there are Democrats who are unhappy with Biden's campaign efforts so far. No joke. Biden was the last man standing, basically. And I'll get into that more in a minute. But it says here, Biden is in stark contrast to President Trump. Biden, for whatever Biden is not, he's in stark contrast. He's like polar opposite. But reality is Biden is for whatever they tell him to be for. He's for whatever the progressives tell him to be for. And the entire Democratic leadership, I hate to break it to you Bernieites out there that think you're the only progressives, the entire Bernie won in a sense that he has changed the Democratic Party forever. I don't know, but certainly for this cycle. The Democratic Party is totally progressive. The leadership, not every Democrat, registered Democrat, but the leaders of your party are 100% leftist progressives and in some case outright communists. That's just a fact. You can walk away or you can take your party back, but don't think for a minute that your leadership isn't hardcore progressive. There, as I said, go back to the 2020 when there was still like 20 of them in the campaign. One thing we knew for sure, that whoever won that, and in this case it's Biden, and I stick by this statement, was going to be the most progressive leftist any party has ever put forward, and that includes George McGovern fiasco. Biden is a leftist progressive, and he does what they tell him to do. But so you got that versus MAGA, basically. Donald Trump, make America great again. He did it once, he's going to do it again if we give him the chance. For now, Biden and his aides are brushing back hard-ringing from Democrats, and it is some serious players that have come out of potentially against Biden, and we'll talk about that in a second. Hand-wringing Democrats and mockery from Republicans who argue that the 77-year-old is hiding in his basement. Is Joe hiding in his basement, or is he being held in his basement? I actually think it benefits his campaign not to be in the public, Corona aside. But campaign manager of Biden, Jen O'Malley Dillon, said voters don't give a S about where he's filming from. What they care about is what he's saying and how we connect to them. Well, this is something I've been talking about, and of course, if I say it, it bears repeating. She seems to be under this impression, and she's probably not, but it certainly seems to be, that this campaign in 2020 is about Joe Biden. It's not. If it is about Joe Biden, it's already over. Because if the American people actually decide about Joe Biden, I'm not saying voting for the guy. I think they, as Nancy Pelosi said about Ocasio-Cortez's victory, there's some parts of the country that you could have a glass of water. If it was registered Democrat, they would win. Matter of fact, they might have a better chance than Biden. This campaign is not about Joe Biden. If it is, he's already done. This campaign is about Donald Trump. It's about how the American people feel about Donald Trump come November. That's what it's all about. And of course, I believe his base is going to be there. I think he's got a great shot at expanding it. We're going to talk about some victories in just a moment that kind of show that. But it's not about Joe Biden. I keep saying it because if it is, it's already over. Biden, and that's not, please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I am not saying that Biden or any other Democrat can't win. That's not what I'm saying. But if it's about Biden, he can't win. If it's just generic Democrat versus Trump, that generic Democrat can win. And I'm not saying they are, but they can. And if you don't believe that, you need to get your head out of this whatever and get to work. Biden was more diplomatic in assessing the situation on Tuesday. Biden told ABC's Good Morning America, this is what he said, the idea that somehow we're being hurt by keeping to the rules and following the instructions that have been put forward by doctors is absolutely bizarre. So I guess he's basically saying he's taking the advice of the President Trump and the task force and staying at home. Well, just keep that. Why don't you just have a hotline to the president? I'm sure he'd talk to you and tell you what to do, Joe. I mean, President Trump, he's your president too, whether you like it or not. Right now, Joe, I hate to tell you, but Donald Trump is still your president. He is. But here's a question I really have. And as I say, I don't relish asking these kind of questions. They just need to be asked. Do you really think Joe Biden can assess his own risk? Is he capable of that? Because let me ask you, if Joe Biden were a member of your family, and I want you to try put politics aside, I'm being very serious here. If Joe Biden was your grandfather, wouldn't you have him based on the way he's acted, at least what we've seen, based on his physical things that have happened, from his eye blooding up to his teeth falling out on stage, basically all that kind of stuff? And I'm not trying to be funny. I do intentionally try to be seriously entertaining, but I'm not at this moment. Joe Biden, if he were your grandfather, you'd have him assessed. You wouldn't let him drive your kids. Would you let Joe Biden drive? I mean, forget about the hair sniffing and all. Just the qualifications, the capability to drive a car. Would you put your kids in the car with Joe Biden and let him go any distance at all? I'll tell you right now, in Florida, we have special laws about driver's license. When people reach a certain age, they have to, when they get ready to renew again, they have to take a special test, because we have a probably one of the oldest populations in the country in Florida in certain segments, and we've had some serious issues with seniors. As a matter of fact, we have a silver alert system here, getting behind the wheel of a car when they have dementia and Alzheimer's and whatnot. I can tell you, I don't believe, and I know a lot about this test, I don't believe Joe Biden could pass that test. So if he couldn't get a driver's license to drive in Florida, should he be given the keys to the United States of America? I don't think so. And in any case, he's had 50-some years to get it right. So now he's got the chance. That's all these long-term politicians on both sides. That's one thing that came out in the Senate hearings yesterday. And once again, I don't say this with any relish either, but the vast majority of the senators in both parties there fall into the special risk category, man. They all looked like they had one foot in the grave and they was about to slip. I mean, our founding fathers never intended for people to just camp out in these Senate seats. They really didn't. I mean, how many of them up there have been up there for 25 years or more? Pretty much all of them that spoke for the most part. Democrats, including the architects of President Barack Obama's 2008 campaign, who questioned Biden's digital savvy and capacity to build the national vote-by-mail effort that might be necessary to win during a pandemic. They keep talking about this vote-by-mail. I got into a Facebook argument with a sitting city commissioner here in Gainesville. He's a decent guy, but he's a hardcore leftist progressive. He just is. And every now and then, I just can't help myself. I know I'm not going to change any hearts and minds. And of course, as soon as I post on there, it's echo chamber, and they just come back and attack me as, I'm a Yahoo ignorant SOB and, dreg and deplore. I mean, everything but a child of God. So I know I'm going to get that, and I'm not going to change hearts and minds. I just can't help myself. Some of us are sicker than others. But they put up this thing, this commissioner, and I'll let him remain anonymous. He put up this thing saying that basically people who are criticizing the vote by mail, I'm paraphrasing it, don't know what the heck they're talking about. We've been voting by mail. He cited the military, how they've been basically voting by mail for 30 years. But I told him that was Facebook. That post ought to be taken down, which I don't think it will be because it's progressive, so they leave them up no matter what. I said, this is essentially false information because they're implying that the vote by mail and the absentee is one and the same. And it is absolutely not. So anybody who's putting that argument out there on either side of the aisle, that the vote by mail that they're pushing, mainly the Democrats, some Republicans too, by the way, is the same as absentee ballot is a lie. Period. It's just a lie. The difference, the basic difference is the absentee ballot. We have some form or fashion, I believe, in every country. And the writer of that post was right about the military has basically been doing that for decades now. But you have to request an absentee ballot. You, the voter, have to request. There's a timeline. There's a framework. There's a procedure. Every state's a little bit different. You have to request an absentee ballot. The vote by mail that they're pushing has nothing to do with absentee balloting. It is a blanket mail out by the federal government to every registered voter, whether you're alive, dead, anything, it doesn't matter. You don't have to request it. It just blanketly mails it out, even if your address isn't right. I mean, all that with a self-return stamp envelope for you to cast your vote. There is a huge difference. There is so much fraud. I mean, do I have to really explain all the different ways you could have fraud in that? So, anybody who's telling you that is lying to you. There's no one really opposing expansion of absentee balloting. There really isn't. Some people question what's going to happen logistically, but as far as trying to do away with it, no one is doing that. The fight is against the total mail-in ballot, which would, in my opinion, not only likely defeat Donald Trump, but would be the beginning of the end for our republic. I'm just telling you as I see it. Back to this article. Billy Bob tells me to get back to the story. If you haven't met Billy Bob, he's my psychic sidekick. Yes, some of us, I say, I'm a fish whisperer, sicker than others. He has a Twitter handle. It's at BillyBobBass1, and mine is at John Martin Talks. But this is very interesting in a criticism of Joe Biden right here. These two guys that are Obama people, they worked hard for Obama. You'll probably recognize one of them in David Axelrod. He's like the architect of Obama's campaign. And David Palouf is essentially a pollist, I guess is how you say, a poll taker for Obama. You'll see him on MSNBC quite often. And, of course, Axelrod is on CNN. But they wrote together an opinion piece in the New York Times op-ed that Biden's home studios resemble an astronaut beaming back to Earth from the International Space Station. I mean, they were pretty critical. Now, the interesting thing about this, and they may have talked to the Biden campaign, but this is very unusual for big wigs at this level of the Democratic Party to come out at this stage of the game and criticize the presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party openly in public with the New York Times, and the New York Times actually printed. All of this stuff is for quite unprecedented, really. So to me, there's only one real explanation of why they did this. They don't believe Biden can win, and they're trying to send that message out. But Palouf and Axelrod, they encourage Biden to make a wider use of platforms from Facebook and Twitter to Snapchat, Instagram, and TikTok. Well, let me just tell you, as I say before, I'm always trying to be helpful. They should include JMT. Joe, if you want to remotely get out, or if you want to travel to Florida, you're welcome to come on John Martin Talks. I would love to. I'd be very fair to you, sir. Trust me, I have experience with elderly people. I have my wife is a home health care nurse, has an agency that I work with. I'm very used. I just got through taking care of my 98-year-old mom. She passed away last year. This was my first Mother's Day without her, by the way, and I miss her a great deal. But I'd be willing to have Joe Biden come on the show and talk. Man, he could do that. So in a similar piece, Liz Smith, and we talked about this gal in a story a couple of days ago, media strategist behind Pete Buttigieg 2020 campaign, touted the virtues of local market media using celebrities more on other platforms. So let me help you out again here, Joe. Don't listen to this gal, Liz Smith, L-I-S Smith. She's working for Andrew Cuomo. She is not trying to help you in any way, shape, or form. She's trying to push her new boss, same as the old boss, forward. She worked for de Blasio. Now she can't stand him, and she works for Cuomo. So do not, Joe, trust Miss Smith in any way, shape, or form. House Majority Whip Jim Clyburn, who basically was the savior of the Biden campaign, said he's very worried about Democrats building a voter turnout operation that balances in-person voting with absentee balloting. What he's really saying is, I don't know if we have enough time to steal the votes we're going to need in a all mail-out vote. So he's worried about that. Clyburn, however, emphasized that it's not Biden's place to worry over the details. His job is to be the candidate. So he's essentially saying, leave poor old Joe alone. Y'all just raise him money, which they had a pretty good cash haul. And you know, don't worry about Joe. We'll prop him up, man. They prop him up like the late Joe Diffie said, prop me up against the jukebox when I die. That's probably what they'll do with Joe. To some degree, the naysaying reflects Democrats' desperation to beat Trump, who holds a clear early lead in fundraising and organizing, and the reality that Biden emerged from a haphazard primary campaign and must now play catch up. Desperate to beat Trump. That is the only reason that Biden won in the primaries. He's the only reason he's the presumptive nominee is they're desperate. TDS is real, and for Democrats, the only thing that matters is winning. How you get there is totally irrelevant, and they're wavering a bit on old Joe, and that's why they're even like the Axelrod and Palouf article even came out. Erskine Bowles, one of Biden's fundraisers and a former chief of staff to President Bill Clinton, man, the Clintons never go away, right? Said the question isn't whether Biden will catch Trump in total fundraising. By the way, does Bill Clinton actually endorse Biden? Not yet. I don't think so. Trump in total fundraising, he won't, but whether he will have the resources to build a winning campaign. Bowles said people are giving, in other words, they're donating to Biden to make sure he does. Well, let me just make a prediction right now on that, because this campaign obviously is going to be different than any other one in history because of the corona and everything else. It's going to be mostly on TV, which they usually are. This campaign, whoever, whether it's Biden or generic Democrat, is going to be the most negative campaign in history. They are going to go full bore negative on Donald Trump. There will be very little positive. There'll be some, just enough, but they'll be positive about Joe Biden. This entire campaign is not about who the Democratic person is. It's about Trump. And it's, in my opinion, it's going to be the most negative one in history. Okay, we're pretty much out of time. I want to say something very, very quickly to give you an update, because you probably won't hear this too many places. And this is a combination of New York Times and LA Times. Republican won in the special election in Wisconsin by a big margin, 57 to 42%. Tiffany, won with 77% reporting. They've declared that person the victory. And in California, it looks like the Republican is going to take the special election and retake a seat that was held by a Democrat. This is the seat that was held by the Democrat who apologized for getting caught with a threesome between her aide and her husband and her. And the only reason it's not 100% yet is because there's so much mail-in voting, that absentee voting in this case, that it's going to take a few days to get the final result. But everybody expects the Republican. They won in Wisconsin. They're going to win in California. This would, if the Democrats had won either one of these seats, it would be the only thing you heard for the next couple of weeks. But you're likely not to hear it again other than right here on JMT, because it doesn't fit the narrative, and it's good news for the president. Hope you've enjoyed the show as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you. Please go directly to John Martin Talks Facebook page, like it, and share it with others. I'll pray for your family. You pray for mine. But above all else, like I say each and every day, from my heart, from my family to yours, have a blessed day. Thank you.